What is going on, everyone, and welcome to the Bot Podcast, where we interview movers, shakers, and innovators and talk all things conversational interfaces. I'm your host, Chad Oda, and today we have a very special guest, Dylan Zwick. Dylan is the Chief Product Officer of Pulse Labs. Pulse Labs provides a platform to test as well as panelist testers so they can generate UX insights for voice applications. So far, Pulse Labs has helped over 200 voice apps really get some of those UX insights so they can iterate and really scale their applications. Pulse Labs is also backed by Amazon, Google, as well as Jeff Bezos' own personal fund. Dylan has also previously held executive positions at companies such as Gaia Interactive as well as Overstock.com. So with that, Dylan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so before we jump into more of the conversational and voice-based questions, I always like to ask sort of a unique question based upon our guest background. So I've seen a couple interviews where you've really talked about, having sort of like a hobby or passion outside of the startup because it really helps you sort of stay focused and aligned. And I've heard you really talk about sort of your morning routine and hitting the gym early. And also it's funny because it sounds like you also met your co-founder that way. So if you don't mind sort of, maybe telling the startup audience out there, why it's important to really have sort of like an outside hobby, something that you're passionate about to keep you going. And also maybe one fitness tip, Dylan has to share about this.
Oh man. So, I used to tell people that for me, two things make the difference between working out or not working out, basically exercising or not. And those two things are, first, you have to do it first thing in the morning or else the rest of the day just gets in the way. And second, you have to do it with somebody else or else you're just going to sleep in. So I figured out, at least for me, that if it's the first thing I do, and if there's somebody who's going to be waiting for me and calling me if I don't show up, I actually get out of bed and show up and make it there every single day. And the nice thing is that the flip side of that is that you can also be the guy, calling your friend. And so if you're kind of accountable to each other, then that actually gets you there. At least that got me there. And so when I was in graduate school, actually, my old workout buddy moved away, and so I needed to find a new gym buddy. And so I made flyers and I put them up around my entire condo building and the neighboring buildings in the complex, and basically said I'm trying out this new workout series, this insanity workout series. If you want to come and do it with me, show up at the clubhouse at 6 a.m. And a guy named Abhishek Sutan showed up, and that's the first time I met him. And he kept showing up, and we became kind of really close friends as a result of that. And then we ended up founding Pulse Labs together. So Abhishek is my co-founder at Pulse Labs, and is actually the CEO of the company. And so, that's kind of how Pulse Labs began way back when. Was actually me putting up flyers in my condo to try to find a new workout buddy. I used to say two things make the third thing that I've realized is that it helps not to be founding a company, particularly in the first 6 months or so. When we started the Alexa Accelerator, which we were part of the first class to go through the Alexa Accelerator, which was the startup accelerator. It's a joint project between Amazon and Techstars here in Seattle. And so when we started that, the first 2 days, Abhishek and I were saying, all right, we're going to start going to the gym together. We're going to be there every day at 6 a.m. That's how we're going to start the day. And then we realized that you have to have some additional time in your life in order to be able to go to the gym or do anything else. And the first 3 to 6 months of starting a company, that can be really hard to find. So since then, we've started going a lot more regularly. And even in the last few months, we've started making it almost in every morning routine, which has been awesome. So, that's important in that it helps to, I wouldn't even say burnout, but what it lets you do is if having things outside of the startup, particularly things that are also productive, exercising, if you play a musical instrument, having a productive hobby in terms of wanting to learn something new. Those are things that can get your mind thinking about something else, and getting your mind thinking about something else can get you unstuck from problems that you're running into within your startup, And so that's I think really where the kind of the value and the impetus there comes from, is that it can help you get a different perspective, because it actually reminds me a little bit about when I was working on my PhD. There's, you sometimes think that the subject of your PhD is the most important thing in the world, and you realize that actually only 5 other people care about it at all. And so your perspective can become a little bit warped. When you're in a startup, particularly the early days, it's the only thing you think about. It's what you're focused on 100% of the time, all of the time. And having something else that you're doing can help reframe your perspective a little bit. Not so much in that, you can say, okay, it's not that important. It is. It's critically important. But it can help you maintain the real world perspective on it that is actually necessary in order for it to be successful and grow.
Totally. No, I think that's great advice, for really anyone, whether you're, on the corporate side of things or on the startup side of things, like having something that just keeps you sort of grounded, so you could sort of step back and sort of look at the problem and be like, okay, well, maybe if we look at it this way, we can figure this thing out there.
Yeah.
By the way, I have to say, putting up flyers is very like data science like approach to finding a workout partner. Because I know you were previously at overstock.com, and that was sort of your role there. I can't recall if it was the director of data science. Right. And so that's what sort of caught my attention initially. I was like, man, that's actually a really smart way to find a workout buddy to keep you accountable. But that being said, maybe a good segue is talking about, getting more into detail about how you guys sort of ended up identifying the problem and how you guys, sort of participated in the accelerator. Because I know at the time you were still working at overstock.com, and your co-founder, the CEO, was at Goldman Sachs at the time. So how did you guys sort of come together and sort of figure out, this is the problem, let's jump into the accelerator and let's hit the ground running?
Yeah, absolutely. So Abhishek actually moved, so we were both in Salt Lake City at the time. So I did a PhD at the University of Utah in mathematics.
And then your dissertation, the title of that, I think some people might be interested.
Yeah, so variations on a theme of symmetric tropical matrices. So if you're interested in symmetric matrices and how they relate to tropical geometry, check out my PhD dissertation, and you can email me about that with any questions. But if you're not one of the 3 people in the world who might be interested in that, so I actually met Abhishek when I was working on my PhD. But right after that, I joined Overstock as a data scientist, and Abhishek got promoted and actually moved to New York City. And so we were no longer able to work out in the mornings together, but we kept in close touch, and we were frequently talking about like new things that we'd seen, new technologies we were interested in, and new, even potential business ideas. And Alexa came out, and I got a couple of them in 2016. Started playing with them, started writing my own programs for them, and got super excited about the space. This is something, since as long as mankind has been building machines, we've wanted to talk to them. But that's always been the realm of science fiction. That's always been something that you did on Star Trek. You talk to you. It's not something that you did in reality. And so when I started playing around with Alexa, I realized, oh my gosh, this is actually, this is moving from the realm of science fiction into the realm of science fact. So this is going to be something huge. And so Abhishek agreed, and I started trying to figure out ways that, what the potential of the industry was, what some of the issues in the industry were, what people were trying trying to understand where kind of the needs were there. And we talked to a bunch of companies and brands that were actually building voice applications, so Alexa skills or Google Actions, to try to get a gauge on, okay, how are they building them? What questions do they have? What difficulties are they running into? And the one that we really hit upon was that when designing or developing voice applications, human beings have this inherent expectation for how a conversation is supposed to go, because we've been having them our entire lives. I mean, in some sense, our brains are innately wired to speak and to have these sorts of conversations with these certain structures. And so being able to, if you fail to meet those expectations, your user's going to have a bad time. And voice is also much less constrained than a visual user interface. So if you're designing for web or mobile, you have like a yes/no question. You can put like a yes button there and a no button there, and you can be pretty certain that they're going to either click one or the other. In voice, those constraints don't exist. And so because it's so much less constrained, it's even more important than it is in any design or product situation to get real user feedback and be able to iterate on that. And so we started putting together a platform for generating real user feedback and for gathering data from essentially remote usability tests for voice applications. And we applied for the Alexa Accelerator. And when we got in, we we burned the ships. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we quit our jobs. We moved to Seattle, and we decided, all right, we are going to make this our main thing. And that's what we've been doing, you know, pretty much every single day ever since then. So
Totally. So how did you guys get from like maybe that initial accelerator to now, you know, really being an integrated partner with Amazon and, you know, driving a lot of UX insights for over 200 voice applications? So like, how did that sort of occur? Was it this like natural progression for you guys, or was it, you know, some obstacles in the way that you guys iterated around during that accelerator?
yeah. So I mean, when we started the accelerator, we were, I would say, there were other companies there that actually had like, you know, product and customer and employees and all that kind of stuff. And then there was us. We were basically like two guys with a prototype and a dream.
Yeah.
And so one of the, I mean, I cannot recommend the Alexa Accelerator highly enough. It was extremely useful, but it was particularly useful in that you had both the mentorship and the guidance and the network coming from Techstars and Techstars Seattle. So you had this community there that really understood startups, really understood entrepreneurs. And then the whole Amazon ecosystem was also basically invested in trying to help with this. And so what that meant is that we got connected to groups within Amazon that were actively working on these same problems and these same issues. And the one in particular that we were connected to that has been an amazing partner for us and we've been unbelievably fortunate to work with was basically the Alexa Skill Kit team. So working with the people at Amazon who are helping third-party developers build skills on Alexa. So we started doing testing for them. We basically said, you know, give us skills that you're building, connect us to your customers, let us start doing testing for them, you know, and we'll learn together. We'll figure this out. The way that they were doing it when we met them was they were basically setting up tables in the lobby of Day One, which is the main Amazon building, and asking people to test there.
Right, so like Wizard of Oz sort of
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we came in and said, let us do this for you. And they said, great. Here
you go.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so we started doing testing for them, and that turned into, you know, that's how we built the product and built kind of the customer pipeline there, was just working really closely with the Ask team and with the partners that they were working with. And as a result of this, we got to do testing for a huge array of different skills and different types of skills. So that's been phenomenal. We've seen Business Week had an article that was the top 25 skills of 2018, and we actually had done testing for the majority of them.
Wow.
So most of the big Alexa skills out there we've actually seen and done testing for.
So I definitely want to touch on those insights that you guys gathered a bit later in the podcast, but I just want to sort of get your thoughts around just the current ecosystem right now, because it seemed to me that early on, and I'm sure you saw this because you guys were in the first cohort, it was so tech-focused, tech-oriented. Companies were beginning to adopt, building these things on whether it was Google Assistant or on Amazon Alexa, but the user experience just wasn't there, even though the point that you made about human language being around for over 200,000 years, yet there was some disconnect as far as here's the technology, here's the experience, and somewhere in between it wasn't exactly matching up. And it seems to me now companies are finally beginning to really understand the importance of conversational design. So are you seeing that sort of trend and that sort of those two components beginning to get a little closer throughout the ecosystem, or is it still sort of nascent right now?
So it's still definitely early days.
Yeah.
So most of what voice applications and voice assistants are going to be is still to come.
Right.
But what we are, so a couple things around that, sort of where how things have changed and kind of where the ecosystem is today. So first off, Apple, Amazon, Google, they're not making this enormous investment in the voice assistant space and in these platforms because they really, really want to dominate the radio alarm clock market.
Right.
What they view this as being the operating system of the Internet of Things. You are going to have, and today we already do, but you are going to be able to interact intelligently with not just your smart speaker, but also your phone, your television, your car, your refrigerator. All of these things are going to be, you're going to be able to interact with them. And the primary medium of communication will be voice. And so that's essentially the dream there. And that's where things are really heading. In terms of where the market is today, I think what we're seeing a lot of learning around the experiences that make a lot of sense on voice. The experiences that, it's not just a question of saying, we're going to take what we've done over here and just port it immediately onto this new thing and see how it does, and everything will work just fine. You really have to think through, this is a new kind of experience, a new type of user interface. What is an experience and what is an offering that really makes sense and that can resonate with our customers for this particular type of experience? And so first off, we're seeing in the transition, smart speakers are a huge hit, and those are going to continue to be a big deal. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there that we can actually talk about. But we're seeing in 2018 there was an almost 600% growth in the prevalence of multimodal voice interfaces or voice devices, and so that actually opens up a lot of new possibilities. So, for example, voice in many cases is the most natural and easy and low friction way of inputting information. Audio isn't always the best way to get information back. So audio isn't always the best way to get a response. And so if the response is just a quick, one sentence or two sentence answer, or if the response is fundamentally an audio experience like playing music, audio is great.
Right.
If the response is a list, particularly a list of like 10 or 15 things,
Totally.
then audio is not the ideal way of getting that information. So being able to say, like, what movies are playing near me, and having a display pop up and say, here they are, and then you can say, oh, I'm interested in that particular movie, or being able to, or either touching it or through your voice, being able to have that option. That I think is going to unlock a lot of new possibilities. Another thing that's huge is the voice assistants in the car. So a car, which is kind of an inherently voice-only or audio-only environment, means that a lot of scenarios that really didn't make a lot of sense in a living room can make a lot of sense when you're driving. So, for example, ordering ahead at your favorite restaurant for pickup. If you're at home, there's not a lot of real reason to do that on your smart speaker. If you're on the freeway and you're driving home, there's a tremendous amount of reason to do that with your voice assistant. So those are some big possibilities there. The other huge one, and this is what I was saying about smart speakers, is that audio and kind of audio content consumption is growing enormously. People are, listening to podcasts while they're walking around, while they're shopping, while they're doing. It's pretty much what we like to do when we're doing something we have to do, but that doesn't require a lot of concentration. An issue there, though, at least for marketers, is that it's really hard to double click, I guess you'd say, on anything that you hear, anything that you experience there. And so what that means is that, like, if you are advertising on a podcast, almost always the person listening to it will not be able to take action upon that immediately. And so what that means is that you would have to remember what you heard. Later on, when you can actually take action on it, think about that, go do what you wanted to do, investigate that, and then if there's some question of attribution, so if it's like use this code or something, remember that code, enter that in. It's real. I mean, there's a lot of what's called breakage in the marketing world there.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, you could just say, to find out more, say, Alexa, tell me more. And you say, Alexa, tell me more. And that could even just send you an email. And you just have an email waiting in your inbox that would tell you more about it, and then you could just go on and listen to your podcast. That would be enormous. That would be huge, and that's something that, in just the audio-only experience, adding an assistant to that will be transformative. So, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing more focus on, okay, let's understand the types of experiences that really make a lot of sense on voice, and hone those, improve those, and add to those, as compared to it's this open field. We've got something over here. Let's just try to port this. Let's just quickly try to port this over here and make it work there.
Definitely.
Those I think have had limited success.
Definitely. I want to dive into some of the things you said. So the first thing you essentially said is, voice really is this like building block for the future of ambient computing. And maybe we're experiencing some of that today, right? Second thing you had mentioned is, I think sometimes people tend to confuse voice first with voice only. And, especially with you broaching the topic of multimodality, right? From what it sounds like, what you're saying is that, here's the customer experience. Voice, we're going to position voice as a touch point where it makes the most sense, but we're not going to say, well, it's the only way they can interact with this brand. We're fitting it into that sort of ecosystem. And then thirdly, you mentioned, it seems to me that right now we're still trying to figure out what are those ideal formats, what are those ideal use cases that are going to best resonate with the end user. So let's dive a little bit more into, how you sort of see voice in the context of the customer experience, and maybe sort of talk more about, it's not voice only, it's voice as a touch point, and multimodality sort of enables more interaction with the brands in a more natural experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I think there's essentially three different scenarios in which it really makes a lot of sense to have a voice application. The first is if it's something that you are going to want to do very, very frequently, and for which a voice application is essentially the easiest way of doing it. Checking the weather, setting an alarm, listening to Spotify. Those sorts of experiences make a ton of sense on voice, and those have been kind of the initial kind of killer applications for smart speakers. The other ones are scenarios where you have an experience that is enjoyable on voice that you can maybe use to add or enhance something that is essentially a daily or maybe weekly routine. One of the most successful games on Alexa has been Jeopardy, right?
Right.
And I actually remember I had the Super Nintendo Jeopardy game, and it was an unbelievably terrible game.
Yeah.
In that it would ask you questions, and then you had to actually type out your response. But you didn't have a typewriter, so you had to actually find the individual letters, hit A, find the next one. I remember trying to play that once and turning it off halfway through and never starting again. So Jeopardy is a show that's been around for 30, 40 years, something like that. And it's kind of been waiting for the perfect application, the perfect platform for offering it as a game for your home.
Right.
And with Alexa, it finally was there. That's kind of the best experience you could have for playing Jeopardy. And so what we see with that is that a lot of people that are fans of the show will actually watch the show at night, and then they'll turn and they'll say, all right, now I want to play it myself. And they'll play a round of it themselves. And so scenarios like that, another application that's been extremely popular is this one from Gimlet Media called Chompers.
Interesting.
And Chompers is this little bit more than 2-minute long podcast that's designed for children to listen to while they're brushing their teeth.
Ah, that's genius.
And the idea there is that it's really hard to get kids to brush their teeth, and it's really hard to keep them focused on it for the full 2 minutes. And so what they do is they gamify it, and they make it this fun, interactive experience so that kids actually look forward to brushing their teeth. So that's taking something that's kind of a routine experience and turning it into something that's that's fun. And so if say Colgate wanted to do something like that and integrate that with something that makes it really easy to buy more toothpaste or something like that, that could be an enormously powerful use case. Those scenarios, though, you do need to be consistently adding new content.
Right.
So it's not something where you can essentially build it and then it just kind of works and people use it all the time. It's something where you build it, if there's traction, you've got to keep supplying new content to it. Third scenario is that you can build cool experiences around, let's say, the launch of a TV series, a movie, an album, that kind of stuff. So you can have it be one channel within your marketing campaign, and you can create a really cool app like Westworld, for example, which is this awesome game. That can be something that's designed around a particular launch and that has a set date. And so even if that's not going to be something that's people are going to be using all the time and for which there's going to be continuous usage, it can be something where you see a big spike in usage, and that can be part of some larger campaign around something big that's going to launch on a particular date. We talked about multimodal, so and voice being kind of just one of the different communication channels, one of the different mediums through which you can communicate with these applications. That, as I said, and multimodal isn't just limited to things like the Google Home Hub or the Echo Show. Your phone is a multimodal voice device. Your TV is a multimodal voice device. And so being able to, right now, with most TVs, the voice interface is being used as a way of essentially entering data the same way that you would with your remote control or with your box. So it's a way of lowering the volume, choosing a channel, more easily doing the things that you were already doing with other devices. But there's no reason why what you're watching can't be interactive. There's
True.
no reason why you can't say, all right, now I'm going to flip that and incorporate, just as we were talking about with podcasting, optional interactivity there. And then also, if you want to, as I mentioned, let's say you want to order movie tickets or something like that. You want to find out what movies are playing. Being able to just say to your TV or to your Echo Show or to whatever, what movies are playing close to me, and it can say, okay, here you go. So I'm interested in that one.
Right.
Immediately bring that up. That decrease in friction. If you can get the rest of the experience right after that, people can do that every single time.
Totally.
Even if it's a choice of, okay, the experience of actually finding the movie and choosing it is as good on this as it is on my phone or my computer. But it's a lot easier for me to start here. That's what you're going to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. It seems to me like there are specific use cases now that lower the cognitive load or lower the friction enough that are just like no-brainers. I think maybe a good segue from what's sort of working now as far as use cases is also talking about the obstacles within this ecosystem, right? Whether that be, around multimodality, and I know Amazon is continuing to release, features and capabilities around that, or use cases such as conversational commerce. But where do you see like the big obstacles right now in the space, obstacles or opportunities, depending on how you look at it, that sort of need to get addressed before we can hit that, I don't necessarily know what to call it, maybe like more mass market adoption where we're getting real, monetization driven through it. And it's like, this is not, an adjunct channel anymore. This is a primary channel for businesses to transact something on.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, as I mentioned a couple times, I think taking audio experiences that exist today and figuring out ways to make them more interactive, I think is where there's enormous potential coming very soon. The other thing is that one of the big, being able, basically allowing the content providers a little bit more flexibility in what they can do there, I think would be huge for the industry. So, even what I mentioned, just listen to a podcast and say, Alexa, tell me more, and having an email sent to you. Being able to do something as simple as that, I think would be huge. Another issue that exists in the voice world today is discovery. This is something that, anybody who's built a skill or an application, has struggled with, is that, figuring out, you can't just build something and then put it out there and expect people are just going to stumble upon it. Think somebody's just going to sit down there and be like, hey, Alexa, does this thing exist that I invoke with these particular words?
Exactly.
And so people it needs to be viewed as part of, when you're building a skill or an application, it needs to be viewed as part of a larger, marketing or even, kind of customer touch point. And so let's say with voice commerce. What I mentioned earlier, just saying, okay, I'm going to take what I've got here and move it over here. It doesn't tend to work. One of the scenarios where we see that is they'll say, hey, we've got a website, we've got a lot of different products on the website, we've got this API that you can use to grab this whole product catalog. We're just going to funnel this API into here, put a conversational skin on top of it, and then you've immediately got access to this whole catalog. Well, that tends to be a not great way of browsing. Yeah. And so rethinking, okay, and then people also have to think to themselves, oh, I'm going to want to go and try this particular thing. On the other hand, let's say that you've got something that doesn't require a lot of browsing and that people, mostly just want to be able to do quickly and effectively. So reordering a consumable that's the same thing for which you get the same thing pretty much every single time.
Right.
You know, things like toothpaste, shampoo, deodorant, paper towels, that kind of stuff. Being able to quickly and efficiently reorder those sorts of products, I think, is a phenomenal potential use case for voice commerce. And that's actually interesting in that, with the movement of so much of our commerce to the internet, to being online, packaging, which has forever been primarily a marketing device to get people to make purchases while they're in a store, is becoming less important in terms of being able to convince consumers about that decision. But it's becoming more important in terms of being able to convince consumers about repurchasing. And so, instead of saying, okay, this is what people are going to see when they're looking at the shelves in the supermarket, you can say, okay, this is what people are going to be seeing while they're using this product within your home. And so one of the more effective ways of dealing with that could be, okay, just put something on that says to reorder, just say this. It tells you exactly what to say, and it is right there at the moment that you're going to want to be thinking about it.
Totally.
And so you could even imagine, like, you've got a paper towel. Well, at the end of that, you've got that roll, right? And that roll really doesn't do it's not viewed as a marketing channel.
Right.
Well, what if you had something on that just says, like, to reorder, say, Alexa, order da-da-da. And it could just be a real quick, like, 2-turn or 3-turn interaction, and you could just say, Alexa, order this. It's exactly what you ordered before. It says, do you want to order this? You say yes. It says, all right, it's on its way. Those are the sort of scenarios that I think voice commerce can make a lot of sense. But you kind of have to rethink how you're doing things and be able to approach it a little bit differently than you've been approaching it on other channels, or else it's not going to work so well.
Totally, yeah. So I was actually talking to the former head of Alexa OS, Alex Spinelli, and he was sort of saying it along those lines where it's like, the goal now is like, we're just trying to, ultimately extract consumer intent, right? We need to like figure out like what is their intent and make it as easy as possible for them to go from like A to B. And what you're saying is absolutely along those lines. It's just like, we can do it. It's just like sort of rethinking how it's being done today and how we're beginning to take technology like voice and adding it as a touch point on that customer journey. And I think in certain ways it's like a bit counterintuitive, even though that voice has been around so long. It's just like our brains don't think like that yet. So it's like that slow succession down there. So that being said, I actually was curious because voice and the experiences is so intimate for consumers. Like, it's almost like brands are so close to consumers now. Do you think, from what you've seen so far, do you think the stakes are higher for brands to get it right, like the first time around? Because I've seen some statistics about, and you said it yourself when we were starting, it's like, if it's a bad experience, people are just not really going to come back. So do you think it's more important and the stakes are higher today? Or is it maybe, similar to other technologies that had previously followed in its footsteps?
So it's always important to get the experience right. It's always part of your brand experience. And the thing is that for any brand, if you're a large brand, you're going to want to be anywhere your customers or consumers happen to be. But you also really want to make sure that wherever they are, they're going to have a good experience that's consistent with your brand. A bad experience is actually much worse than no experience at all. And so that's particularly important. One thing that's different, I would say, about voice that really doesn't exist or hasn't existed on the web or even on mobile is that the experience that you have on, let's say, Alexa or on Google Home consumers view that as not just an experience that they're having with your brand, they also view that as an experience that they're having with the platform itself. And so it's extremely important to Amazon and to Google that those experiences are good as well. Because if I'm using, let's say, like, I'll say brand X. If I'm using the application from brand X and I have a bad time, I'm going to associate that as a bad time with not just the brand but also with the Google Assistant or with Alexa. And that is something that is somewhat new to this particular platform. Another thing, and that's something that's interesting here, is that Alexa and Google Assistant, they have kind of their own voice and their own personality that people associate with them. And so brands, when they're building something on one of these platforms, it's actually important to try to differentiate yourself. You say, okay, I don't want this to be like, if you have Alexa saying, welcome to, the detergent skill or something like that, people are still going to think, oh, I'm talking to Alexa, And so, but this is a big opportunity to say, okay, if I want to, I can create my kind of audio brand and get that in front of them here. But yes, it's certainly the case here that, along with discoverability, there are less reminders, there are less things out there that say, hey, you should be using this, or hey, come and give this a try. So if someone tries it out and they have a bad time, they're very, very unlikely to come back. Their kind of repeat rate or return rate is going to be a lot lower. And so, it's critically important that you get it right. And that's actually where usability testing comes in. That's actually where usability testing is so important. Is that, what we do and how we work with brands is, we work with them to try to go through what the experience is with real users to make sure that they are that experience is as good as it can be before they launch it. Before they put it in front of their customers, kind of out there in the wild.
Totally.
And so that's really kind of the important thing. That's the critical part of usability testing. Is you want to make sure that you surface issues like that and problems like that early on in the process so that you can fix them and address them before they cause problems or before they embarrass you.
Absolutely. And it also seems like, you should be leveraging a service like yours not only during the initial design stages, but also potentially throughout the entire life cycle to sort of add additional features and to hopefully validate as much as you can before you deploy those.
Absolutely. So by far the most, effective engagements that we've had have been for skills or applications that have involved multiple rounds of testing. And so there's a tendency for a lot of these projects to say, okay, user testing is one of the last things that we do. And the problem there is that what that means is that if you run any problems or issues, they can be a lot harder to fix than if you encounter them a lot earlier. And so incorporating a number of rounds of usability testing actually saves you time and money in the long run. And so what that means is that, one example is we actually worked fairly closely with another one of our Alexa Accelerator cohort companies, which was Sensible Object, which is actually a board game company. And they built an Alexa skill called WordMine that actually won the kind of the grand prize for Alexa games. And we did like 4 rounds of testing for them. And it began with just like testing of different prototypes. They had like 8 ideas, and we put them in front of people and said, okay, how do you like this idea? What do you think of this? And is this an experience that makes sense to you? And then honing that and refining that up till the final, okay, we think we've got the whole thing figured out, let's make sure. Those can be extremely important. Those, are kind of how you get great games or great applications. And then, once you've launched, the data that you get from an application that's out there in the wild can be as valuable, certainly a lot better than nothing, but it's not the same level of detailed data that you get from a good user test.
Totally.
The level and detail of data that you can get is much greater in user tests, and also the kind of the post-test feedback that you're able to get from asking people questions is enormous. So being able to, even once you've launched, if you want to try to improve it, if you want to try to iterate on it, if you want to try to make it better, you're going to want to incorporate testing there, because you want to know what your users are doing and what they want to do as compared to just trying to guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, what you guys are doing at Pulse Labs is actually very fundamental to just this entire ecosystem, because it's almost like we didn't really know the workflows that needed to be developed around building, industry grade experiences. So sort of adding, what you guys do into that begins to, I think, create certain industry standards around how we build these things amongst the variety of different stakeholders that have to participate. But that being said, so I've been checking out some of your blog posts, and you've been putting out like these design principles. So I was wondering if you could walk us through some of these best practices for designing Alexa apps, because I think you're probably pretty excited to talk about these things as you guys have seen the data.
Yes, so absolutely. So those actually were based on a presentation that I did at reInvent last year with Paul Cutzinger. He was one of the Alexa evangelists. Yeah, exactly. And so I can't actually take credit for some of the principles.
Fair enough.
All credit goes to Paul on those. But one of the things that we talked about during the test during the talk was, I went into scenarios where we saw these principles, in action or being violated in applications that we've tested. And so I mentioned the tendency to want to take what you're doing over in, web or mobile and bring it to voice. In terms of design, I would say that one of the most profound ways that voice differs from visual or GUI design is that in a primarily visual medium, data can be presented simultaneously and is persistent. So you can have a bunch of different options all presented at the same time and available at once. But in voice and audio, data is presented sequentially, and it's ephemeral. On the other hand, in a visual medium, space is at a premium. So the number of possible options that you have at any given time is limited. In voice, those same restraints don't really exist. And so something like a nested menu, which can make tremendous sense if you are building Windows or something like that, is almost always a terrible experience on a voice user interface.
Totally.
So we've tested things where, in order to get somewhere, you can't just say, I want to go there. You need to first say, I want to choose this, then I want to choose this, and then I want to get this. We tested one where it was for a restaurant application. And one of the things you had to specify was which of the different restaurants you wanted to order from. And so if you wanted to change your location, you couldn't just say change location. You had to say change something.
Sure, yeah.
And then it would give you options, and from that you had to say change location. That's sort of a setup where you first go to something and then location. Makes tremendous sense on your phone.
Sure.
It makes zero sense in a voice application. So the principle there is you want to keep things as flat and as broad as you possibly can. And that encapsulating kind of the dictum, be available.
Yeah.
Make sure as many different options are available to your user at one given time, because A, they're going to have trouble remembering exactly where they are within a flow, and B, it's unnecessary, because you can just make everything immediately available, or almost everything immediately available to them right there. So that's one of the huge kind of differences that exist there, and that's one thing that we see very frequently in our testing.
Absolutely. So I think also, another thing to sort of touch on is, do you see limitations within the current, capabilities that have been surfaced so far or not surfaced so far within platforms that you'd like to see surface that, potentially can move this experience on? Because, as I hear you say this about voice, and what we were previously talking about multimodality, I could just imagine if we had both of those things in consort and this was the now standard, right? We could have those menus and we could also have audio and those things work and there's some sort of integration with that. So do you think there's certain things right now that can sort of be evolved in that area?
Yeah.
And what would you look for?
So in terms of things that I would like to see, again, I know I'm getting somewhat boring on this point, but it's the ability to take long form audio or to take longer form audio and keep that in the context of the skill. So being able to interact and respond to that optionally, that would be amazing. In terms of what how people are building on these platforms, yes. So I think that visual design is hard and takes time.
Sure.
Voice design is hard and takes time. Multimodal design is even harder and takes more time.
Yeah.
So getting those sorts of experiences right is difficult, but it's also critically important.
Definitely.
And so I think that both platforms are working very hard to provide the right tools and the right environments for allowing people to easily build these sort of experiences. But yes, to your point, if you have back to my example of a movie ticket ordering application,
exactly.
If you've got the option of being able to see things and click on things and go through menus if you want, or you can just say, take me here. If you know what you want, just say, take me here.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go through all that. It just says, all right, here it is.
Right.
Being able to just say, to see your options when you're trying to pick among them, when you don't know exactly what you want, but also being able to just immediately issue a direct command when you do know what you want.
Totally.
That is huge.
That would be like the idealized state.
Exactly. Cool. And so that is kind of being able to meet your customer at exactly where they want to be and to provide them, with what they want when they want.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So as you guys have sort of gotten insights back after testing, this plethora of different voice applications, have you guys begun to see some behavior change? Whereas earlier on, maybe consumers were more hesitant or maybe the brands didn't really want to use certain use cases. Have you seen sort of behaviors evolve over the course of maybe the last couple of years you guys have been, aggregating some of this data?
Yes. So what we have seen is in terms of what people are building, in terms of what people are excited about, there has definitely been a switch. There has been more of a switch into focusing on use cases that have turned out to really make a lot of sense in voice. And so one example, I brought up earlier is Jeopardy.
Right.
Well, there's now a lot of other game shows that are moving and building on voice right now. They've seen that work, and so we
got to be over
there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Deal or no deal, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, all of that's kind of moving there. Because those are scenarios where people who are fans of the shows kind of know what to expect.
Sure.
And so they go in thinking, all right, I have some. It's clear to me how this interaction is going to work, and that is how it works. Yeah. Those are we're seeing that there, and then we're also seeing, as I said, more skills that are coming out that are utilizing things that people have realized make a lot of sense in voice. So trying to, there's less of just, as I said, having a huge catalog immediately available there,
right,
and more thinking around, okay, what are routines and what are scenarios in somebody's life in which having a voice interaction at that particular time and moment is going to make a lot of sense, is going to be powerful, and that's that's where I think a lot of the focus is today, as compared to, hey, this is this brand new platform. Let's just get something there.
Right.
Let's, the first thing is just get a lot out there and see what's working.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a little bit of information about what's working, so there's more focus on, all right, that seems to be working. Let's build on that. Yeah,
totally. It's not like, let's go build fart applications for mobile devices like during the period of smartphones, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So from what you're saying, it sounds like people that are building these things are becoming more pragmatic about aligning the technology and incorporating it into sort of the consumer behaviors that most fit voice, right? Mm-hmm. Cool. So that being said, Pulse Labs today is very sort of centric around extracting UX insights to help companies sort of iterate on their voice applications. Where do you see Pulse Labs going in the future? Like, what's the future sort of? Where are you guys going?
Yeah, absolutely. So where we're going is, two things. One is that the insights that are available actually from our tests and from our platform, we provide a level of data that is actually deeper than you're able to get anywhere else in the market today.
Interesting.
So during one of our tests, you can do a test on a device, and for that testing session, you can get back the entire transcript of what the person said and how the platform responded, and you can get all of the audio, so you can actually hear what they said and so if there was a misunderstanding between what the person said and what the platform heard, you can actually explore that and get into that.
And that's currently not accessible directly through Amazon.
No.
So this is a great way to actually get that real feedback. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that is an offering that is actually unique to our platform.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can't get that anywhere on the market today.
Right.
We want to make that available to more people.
Sure.
So we are really strongly working to build out our platform so that it's if someone wants to do a user test, and let's say they just want to do it with like 5 friends and family or something like that, you should use our platform to do it. It should be, if anybody is doing any type of testing on any voice application, they should be using our platform to do it.
So maybe adding more self-service features to it. Sounds like cool.
So adding self-service features to it. So it's not a situation where you can still definitely get in touch with us, work out a usability test with us. Absolutely, we want to do that, and we're going to continue to do that for the big brands, the big customers.
Cool.
But there's this whole other population of enthusiastic Alexa skill builders who might not have the financial resources or to get like the full service testing, and we want to make that self-serve available to all of them. So that's kind of where we want to go. Is if anybody is doing any type of testing or user research on voice applications, we want to make sure they're using Pulse Labs.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So 2019 this year, what are you most excited to see in the voice space?
So 2019, the thing that I'm most excited about, so I think healthcare is a really exciting possibility. A couple days ago, actually, Alexa just came out with some healthcare skills that are HIPAA compliant.
The HIPAA compliance,
So I think there's a lot of possibility there, particularly with particularly in the ability to effectively serve the elderly population.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you can get that experience right, that is an experience that I think could work really well for people that are uncomfortable with technology, and that also might not be as physically able to use it as you or me. And so I think there's a lot of possibility for voice to serve communities that are not as well served by other technological means. And then the other thing is the car. Having voice assistants and voice applications available in the car.
Right.
That is, as I said before, that is an inherently kind of voice, or hopefully voice only.
Right,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know people sometimes do that, but they shouldn't.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you can even decrease that, you're going to save lives.
Totally.
And so the potential applications in the car environment, I think, are going to be transformative in terms of kind of the voice only experience, and then the continued growth of multimodal, and kind of what that's going to unlock.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. So at this point, Dylan, I want to give you the stage. Let people know where they can find and learn more, maybe where they may be able to see you speak in the near future here. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. And I'm actually going to be on the Alexa Live conference on May 2nd. I'm one of the speakers there, and I'm actually going to be talking more about the kind of principles of voice user interface design that I mentioned here today. So please watch that, and I think that'll be available definitely online on May 2nd. I think the recordings will be available after that. I'm going to be speaking at the Voice Conference in July, but if you want to find out more about Pulse Labs, the best place to do it is just pulselabs.ai. So go to pulselabs.ai, and if you have a voice application out there that you want to have tested, go there, set up an account. You can get started for free. You can start testing for free. If you have any questions about that, let us know. We'll be happy to answer them. Also, if possible, you want to be a tester for our voice applications, you can also sign up to be one of our testers there. So if you want to find out more about Pulse Labs, just go to pulselabs.ai, and we would love to talk to you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, before we let you leave, I always ask all of our guests this question, especially sort of endeavoring into the unknown is sort of the main theme of startups, especially going into an emergent technology. So for you, like on a day-to-day basis, like what keeps you motivated? What keeps you inspired? Like, why do you keep doing it?
What keeps me motivated is the enormous potential of this space. I think that what we're seeing in the voice assistant space is going to be the biggest deal in the next 10 years in terms of how people are interacting with technology. It's going to be 15 years ago. Jeff Bezos gave a TED Talk back when not everybody was doing it. back when that was hard and prestigious.
Wasn't that cool?
Yeah, exactly. When doing that was still cool, and he talked about how the metaphors that we're using for the internet.
Yeah.
And this was right after the big .com crash. So the metaphor that he first talked about was the idea of a gold rush.
Yeah.
He said actually that there's some similarities, but a much more powerful metaphor here is electricity.
Interesting.
It's kind of this thin interaction layer upon which you can just build this enormous number of things. And so that's really what I think the voice space is. It is this kind of ubiquitous interface through which everybody's going to be interacting with pretty much all the technology in our lives. And so that's what keeps me excited, is getting that right and getting that delightful and making that as great as it can be.
Cool. I love it, Dylan. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on the Bot Podcast. Definitely would love to have you back once you guys have some of your more like maybe super secret things that you haven't released yet out in the wild. But at that, Dylan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Thanks,
Take
Chad.
it easy, guys.